saying Happy Tuesday. It's time for AIR Radio. And Jennifer Hillman will be back in just a few minutes with her guest.
Good day, everyone. This is Jennifer Hillman, and this is AIR, Abstract Illusions Radio. Today's guest is Tom Grasso. I said it wrong. Grasso, and he is a phenomenal writer. He's also a firefighter back in New Jersey. He has a lot of insights and a heart of gold. His writing is poetic, it's gentle, masculine, truly understanding the new ways of humanity. And I asked him to be on. And I've had many conversations with Tom that are it just floats so nicely. He has a beautiful perspective on so many things. So how are you doing today, Tom?
I'm doing well. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I want to ask you a few questions about being a firefighter first.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're all about service. Hands down, no question. What was it about being a firefighter, though, what was the calling to do that? I mean, that's really risky and dangerous, and great appreciation here for you doing it, but what was that like? What is that like?
Well, the weird thing is a lot of the people I serve with, you know, some of them are, in fact, quite a few of them are maybe second, third, fourth, fifth generation firefighters, and I'm a newbie. I'm the first one in my family that's ever done it, and it's strange because I cannot tell you what it is that draws me to it. I can tell you my earliest recollection, and one of my earliest memories actually was of an oven fire we had in our little home in Magnolia, New Jersey. And I was about 4, maybe 5 years old, and the fire department came, and I was just so in awe of these men that got off the truck, and you know, everything looked much different then than it does now, but of all the equipment that they had and how nice they seemed to be to a little boy who was frankly scared out of his wits. And I remember I walked out, I was in my underwear. I walked out of the house and started looking at the trucks, and at that moment I fell in love with the fire service, and it took me about another 15 years, I guess, 16, 17 years, somewhere in that range before I actually got the guts to go down to my local volunteer fire department and join. But I can't tell you what draws me to it. I will say this, and if you take a look at, I think, how the universe works in us, there's chemicals that flow through our bodies, I think, that the universe has put in there to lead us in certain directions. And I do love the adrenaline that comes from almost every call that we get. And that is balanced nicely by that feeling of satisfaction in helping someone, even if you weren't successful. There is an awful lot of tragedy and sadness and things like that go on in our business. And I'm one that I really observe those things, but there's an awful lot of triumph and a feeling of just being in a position where you're doing something that most can't or won't. And that when someone calls you, they need you, and you respond, and they don't even know your name at the end of the day. They may not like what you've done. You might have broken a few windows in their house and they're not happy, or might have cut a hole in their roof, but at the end of the day, you've done something, I think, that is above the normal human condition, and that's a good feeling for me. So I do like it.
And how long have you been doing it now?
About 23 years total, and I've never gotten paid for it. It's always been a volunteer deal for me. In fact, when I was younger, I've had several opportunities to become a paid firefighter, and there was a little bit of idealism in me where I did not want to get paid for this act of service. I didn't want to turn it into a job. I wanted it to be something that I did because I wanted to, and not because my paycheck depended on it or my family's benefits depended on it. I didn't want to have to answer to a union. I just wanted to do it of my own free will. So I kind of turned down those jobs. And now financially I look at it and I go, God, what was I thinking? But as an idealist, 20-year-old, 30-year-old, I had decided at that point not to accept them. But, so about 23 years total, and, not just firefighting. Most people see firefighters and they think fire, but most of us are involved in other aspects of service, and, from everything down to helping with ambulances to, motor vehicle accidents, specialized rescues. Fire service no longer is just about fighting fire. It's really an all-encompassing act of service now. And, I will say this. I've met it in my career. I'm also, in the response industry. That's where I get paid. The people I met that draw paychecks as this, we all share a common ideology. We all share a common goal. We all share a common thought. And if you ever get down on life and you ever get where you're questioning mankind, go down to your local fire department and just talk to the guys, whether they're on the job as paid people or they're volunteers or whatever. Go down and talk to them, because there you're going to see the purest form of the human condition. You're going to see people who will give their lives to others, who will die in the service of their fellow human beings. And you'll see people, quite frankly, you won't like. Everything that is about the human condition you'll find in a firehouse. And it is a beautiful thing to see, but you'll always leave there knowing there's human beings that are there that care about you, even if they don't know who you are.
It's almost like a microcosm of humanity.
It is. It is. You'll find that, Jennifer, it's odd you say that, because you find that in almost every place of service. And, wherever. You go to a soup kitchen. You see a microcosm of our human experience in a soup kitchen. You go to a homeless shelter. You go to a covenant house, where they're fighting human trafficking. You go to any of these places where people just give of themselves, you see a microcosm of the human condition. I've always thought that on any incident that a fire department or a rescue team rolls on, there is a greater example of the history of the human condition in that microcosm of an instant, which is what, you look at Haiti, which is still this ongoing disaster that we've forgotten about in our consciousness because it's not making money for the media. But if you take a look at Haiti, there's still so many beautiful human beings that are donating their time, going down there and helping people who still have not even come close to recovering from that earthquake. And that is a continuing process. These people aren't after the accolades. They're not after the pats on the back or the awards that somebody might give them, because nobody cares about them right now. They just care about that feeling that we all seem to get when we help someone, and knowing that they've done something good for one another. And that to me is, you see that in any event, in any incident. Some are small, you'll never hear about them. Some are large, and they get splashed all over the media. Even if it is only for a second, because people tend to get bored with feel-good stories after a while. But you take a look at those things, and you can see the entire history of our human condition in that microcosm of time. Pretty interesting observation if you're just willing to make it.
Oh, definitely. I mean, even with the tragedy of yesterday with the Oklahoma tornado that just tore through and just flattened a town. The first responders, they're there, they care. They're putting everything they have out there. And with any kind of tragedy like that, the first responders are just really an amazing presence. I always go in awe of those first responders. Was there ever a time that you hesitated going into a scene because of the danger, or do you just go on automatic and you just go?
There's two types, at least two types of hesitation there, Jennifer. There's that one where you say, do I really want to do this? No, I've never experienced that. I do have a switch in my head that once something happens, I want to be there, and I want to be helping. And not only that, but I want to use my experience to help those that are helping others too. So now I've never had that, but we do have this little bit of hesitation in us if we're smart. And that hesitation is what we call safety. And you do use, I tend to use fear as a tool. It makes me think sharper. It makes me slow down a little bit to the point where I'm not going to do something silly, because I have children that depend on me, and I've got friends that I think kind of like me, and things of that nature. I don't want to just leave them behind because I've done something silly. So if you ever talk to somebody who says that they don't experience the hesitation of fear in an incident, in some instances, there's some that they're kind of routine, that your head's on straight, but there's no fear involved. But I've never been in a working house fire or on the end of a rope rappelling or at the top of a ladder truck doing whatever we do there that I haven't had fear. And people often are shocked to know or to find out that I have an intense fear of heights. And given my druthers would never climb a ladder, I would never want to be in a bucket. But I think some that know me for a long time in the service would kind of be surprised at that, because I'm still on top of roofs cutting holes when we need to. I'll climb a ladder when the time is calling me to climb a ladder. I'll do all those things because I've learned to use that fear that I have to keep me safe. And so there is hesitation sometimes. If I get an order to climb a ladder to go vent a roof or whatever, I hesitate. But it's a hesitation of, I'm going to make sure I'm not going to do anything that's going to make me fall from this roof or fall through this roof or fall down, down a ladder. Right. So yeah, I mean, there is moments of hesitation there, but never where I won't do something I'm asked to do or that I know I need to do. So.
Right. With being a firefighter and doing it in a way for the passion of service,
mm-hmm.
And observing humanity, have you noticed the shifting elements within your town of people that you thought have changed through the times that you see quite often? Or is there just a flow and it's like that's who they are, they're not going to change, and you just accept them? Have you seen a lot of people kind of shifting?
I'm going to say no to that question. Shifting in regards to becoming more centered, or, I mean, depending, I don't see many people as different today than they've been, when I signed up in 1999. That's not a bad thing ordinarily, though. Again, we talk about the microcosm of the human condition. Whenever we get called to something, it's usually because somebody needs us. And mm-hmm. Our need. They need our expertise. They need our bravery, whatever it is they need. They need it from us. And I've always found people wanting to help each other in those situations. You're going to have people that are afraid, and guess what? They're going to run out of a house fire. That's what they're supposed to do. That's what the human mind tells you to do. We have this saying in the fire service, we're running in as you're running out. And that's exactly the way it should be, because we're trained in what to do there. But I haven't seen a shift because I've always detected a presence of great compassion in some of the incidents that we've been in. Conversely, you see some examples of absolute hatred in some of these things. I mean, you roll up on a job where somebody just beat the tar out of somebody. That's an extreme amount of hatred. But that hasn't shifted. The microcosm of the human experience, as I see it in my role as a firefighter, looks no different today than it did in the early 90s when I signed up. And again, I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing, though, Jennifer. I see that as that we always have in our basic instinct a desire to be compassionate and loving and of service to other people. And that's what I usually see when we get on a job, when we get on an incident. You see people who want to help, whether it's passersby who have stopped at an accident scene, or somebody giving CPR, some random civilian giving CPR to somebody who's just collapsed on the sidewalk, or even people just handing each other water on a job. I mean, I remember back in the early 90s, at a house fire in the summertime, you'd have neighbors coming out and giving you drinks. And so when I say it hasn't shifted, is because I don't necessarily seeing it as being totally bad that it needed to
Right.
shift.
Well, I didn't mean it in that way. And I actually was trying to see if there's been any improvement, like you're seeing it more often with the, a lot of people are waking up and they're realizing what is really important to people. I'm seeing more people being compassionate, actually being more helpful, trying to assist other people. Whereas before, when I met them, it's like they didn't want anything to do with whatever. They were more the takers than the givers. Mm-hmm. And now I'm finding more of the balance of if you help somebody out, they will go out of their way to help you.
That's definitely true. Where that story I just told you about not seeing the shift leads to is, I think, in events where people are in dire need, whether it's a great event like the tsunami or the earthquakes in Haiti or overseas or whatever, or the incidents in Oklahoma or the Boston bombing, wherever there's these incidents of great tragedy, and we get on location, we see the best of humanity in a lot of cases. We see those people who want to reach out and help, who will put themselves in harm's way to help someone else, who will go beyond what they think they're capable of doing to help someone else. That to me hasn't changed. But where it's changed is that now in everyday life, people are starting to do that without it having to be a major incident that's causing them to do it. And that's where the shift is happening. It's not so much happening when we get on location. It's happening weeks after we've been there. It's still ongoing. So the shift isn't, again, not to keep repeating it, but the shift isn't so much when the incident happens. The shift is when the incident, before it's happened and after it's happened. That's where the major shift that I see is happening, and it's pretty good to notice. As I mentioned with the Haiti thing, these people are continuing to do it years after this earthquake. They're saving their money. They're taking time off, unpaid time off from work. They're asking their neighbors for clothing and school books and other things, just basic necessity items, to take with them to this island to help people that don't know who they are, who they don't know. And these folks that are doing it never get attention, ever. They don't ask for it. They don't necessarily want it. If they want it, it's to help other people. That's a major shift for me, because I'm not sure that even back in the 90s or the earlier part of this millennium, that necessarily was true. And so I do see a major shift outside of that. Absolutely.
With all the changes that you are seeing, is that why you took up writing?
No, I've that's a great question.
Your writing is very poetic. It's very deep. It's very, I never really have said this for a man's writing, but it is very sensual. It is the best way to say a texture to it, which in some ways makes no sense, but it does if you read it. I mean, you draw the person into the experience. And that's why I wonder if your experience outside your world has drawn you to writing.
It's funny. I've never been asked which draw me to writing, so it's kind of a new question, and I welcome it. I kind of view writing as maybe as walking. I was born with these two legs, and it would be a shame not to use them. And I guess maybe writing is the same way. I was born with the ability, and I've always had it, I think. I never remember not being able to write. Why not use it? And I actually enjoy it. I enjoy being able just to sit down and take whatever is coming through me and put it somewhere else. And I don't even know what I've written half the time until after I'm done with it. But and that other people can respond to it. Not just women, but men, and outside of the fire service thing, that's where I see the most incidents of a shift occurring is when people read something that I may have written. And the one major change in my writing from when I was younger to now is that I'm much more honest when I write. There's no, except where other people might be involved, where I want to protect their privacy and who they are and all that kind of stuff. I don't put a boundary on what I'm going to write. And it has caused some angst in my past relationships because somebody will say, well, they know it's about me and this is embarrassing. And I'm saying, I'm sorry, you know, I can't help myself. But I don't have a governor on what I write anymore. And that's been the biggest difference. And I think that honesty, that ability to actually talk to somebody without a governor, without a limit, opens them up. And I'm starting to get an awful lot more responses from both men and women that say, you know what, that's exactly it. That's exactly how we feel. That's exactly where I'm at. That I couldn't have said. And you know, what really prompted me to explore writing deeply was the failure of my marriage. And in, I guess, kind of sharing that failure and sharing that sadness and that deep dark abyss that I was in for a while, and how you get out of it, and how empowering surviving that type of experience can be once you, I guess, learn the secrets of survival. You start to see it all around, where people are so struggling in their personal relationships with others, and they feel so alone and so helpless, and they don't realize their own power. So being able to share that with them and having them get a response and have a continuing dialogue, that's pretty important to me, because that's also an act of service. It's, you know, the bell goes off and I've responded, I guess, in kind is how I look at it. And I don't necessarily see what I do as a tremendous asset or service or whatever, but I do enjoy the constant dialogue because I learn from that too. And I found a lot of good friends through my ability to create. So wouldn't change it for anything.
So where do you get your inspiration? Is it just things you've gone through, a moment of release, then, of getting insights of what you are going through?
It could be. People have asked me, where do you get your inspiration from? And I have no clue. It'll just hit me all of a sudden. And, I've read books by Stephen King and other accomplished writers, and I've had people in the industry tell me, no, you've got to block off this amount of time. I think Wayne Dyer says, come hell or high water, he sits down for 4 hours to write. And if I did that, I think I would hate writing. I could be in the shower and something will hit me, and I have to get out and write about it. It could be an experience I see somebody else having, and it relates to my own, and I'll sit there and write about it. Or it could be just one morning I wake up and, God, it was so wonderful. The other morning I woke up and all my windows were open and the birds were out. It was like I was camping, but I was still in my apartment, and it just inspired me to write something. I didn't put it out there, but I wrote it, and I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. You know, it could be just about anything, Jen.
Yeah. I'm the same way. It's just, for me to sit down and force to write, I laugh about that idea, and I applaud the people that can do it. There's moments when I just get really into a moment, and I can really write for pages and pages and pages. And, you know, I just celebrate writing that poem that is like maybe 20 lines, and that's it. If it really captures the emotion, the moment, the inspiration, if that's it, I have a great day.
Yeah. And your stuff is fantastic, you know. And
oh, thank you.
Well, it's always nice, personally, to be complimented by somebody who's equally as creative, and somebody who gets it, you know, kind of understands what it takes to actually put your heart out there. And that is, you got to be much braver to put your heart out there like we do than it is to go into a burning building. I'll be quite frank with you. It's
really?
It is, at least from a man's perspective, where, I think you and I have talked about this before,
Yes.
where you're kind of raised in that archetypical stereotype of tough man. And, hey, I'm a tough guy. I don't have a problem admitting that. I could throw down with the best of them. I might not always win, but I'll give you a good run for your money. And, hey, I've got all that baggage that, my forefathers have loaded onto my shoulders and said, you got to carry around. But I'm not afraid of that other side of me either. That I think it's a divine feminine that all men have that we've learned to beat down into submission over the years. And that's where, if I was to name what inspires me to write or where my writing comes from, I'd almost have to say it comes from the divine feminine within me. That ability to touch a sensitive part that may not always be present in us. And I think all men have it. It just takes an enormous amount of bravery to come out with it.
It's the vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. I sometimes in my head envision vulnerability to be kind of like hanging off a cliff by a small little root of a flower, and that's the only thing keeping you from falling. That's how it feels sometimes for me, and it's a scary process, and you don't always open up like that to everyone. And that's why I think I enjoy my writing so much, because it gives me an opportunity to practice that opening and to be more vulnerable than I ever have previously. Every time I write, I think I'm a little bit more vulnerable than the time before. And it's a pretty good feeling to have. I can't explain it to somebody. They'd have to experience it for themselves, but it is this enormous, if I could use the word orgasm, it's almost like that, where you're like, wow, it just feels so good. And I use the word, I write sensually quite a bit. And to me, kind of being vulnerable it's having an orgasm with your partner at the exact same time. That's what it feels like. Like, yeah, not only have you feel good, but you've made someone you care about feel good too. And that's almost what it's like. But you can't describe what that feels like, obviously, but that's kind of what it feels like.
Well, writing definitely is a release.
Mm-hmm.
And so to say it's orgasmic is very true. It's like I said, I celebrate the expression that's on the page, especially if I'm writing and it's almost, and I know you'll agree, it's almost like something outside of you and you're just channeling the words, and it's actually a message for you, but it's a message for everyone. And it just touches and opens your heart to such a depth and expands your heart in such a way that you just go, oh yeah, that's what life's all about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you just described it perfectly. I mean, it is a channeling. I view this conversation we're having as a channeling too, because I'm not putting any thought into it whatsoever. I'm not thinking about my answers. I'm just trying to translate some of them so I don't sound like I'm speaking a different language. But I think when we're in spirit, when we're inspired, which all creativity is, you're being channeled by something. And I don't like to define what that something is for obvious reasons, but you're being guided by something. Something has gotten a hold of you. That's what being in spirit means. And you're no longer kind of inhuman. You're in spirit, and you're guided by something else. And sometimes the human will get in the way. And that's what I meant by being vulnerable when you write, is that kind of you'll look at it and you'll go, wow, do I really want people to know that about me? Or do I want, or what will the guys think? And sometimes you just got to say to heck with it. I don't really care what they think, because I'm still the guy I was before they read this. And I don't think if people who have met me will look at me and say, yeah, that's a guy we can push over. I'm still that guy that, the funny thing is, I'll put this out there right now, Jennifer, is when people meet me, they're shocked that I'm that guy that does that writing. You're not used to seeing, 6 foot, 250-pound guys who can write, who put their hearts out there. Guys like me at the gym, we're kind of grunting and groaning. I see a shift there too, and I think a lot of guys who are starting to see the mistakes of their parents, particularly in their relationships, and starting to see their own mistakes and how much they've suffered in those mistakes with other people. We'll say women as far as guys go. We're starting to learn from that, and we're starting to realize that we've been doing it wrong probably for centuries, if not a millennium. And maybe we need to kind of reverse that trend a little bit. There is a shift there. That is going to take so much time, though, I think, because I don't think us guys necessarily are as smart as you women are. It takes us longer to learn. And, women kind of get it. And us guys, it's hard for us. It's hard for us to let go of those roles that seem almost genetic at this point.
Well, don't you think that's partly because of society and the media and what we've been ingrained and programmed with for so long?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was having that discussion with one of my oldest friends this morning by Facebook, which seems to be the way we all communicate nowadays. But he lives on the other side of the country, and he's of one religious ilk. And we've had these discussions since we were about 8 years old, I guess. And, well, now that I think about it, it's 33 years. But if you look at the human condition, it's all about behaviors passed on from someone else to us. We're not born with religion in our brain. We're not born with race in our minds. We're not born with sexual bias. We're not born with any of that nonsense. We're all taught that. So one of my earliest writings that I can remember, I wrote about the fact that I thought all human beings were perfect the moment they were born, and then their parents get a hold of them, and their parents create the human from the being. I mean, or, we're kind of molded out of God now into something else, and you can see that. You talk about microcosms of life. If you're willing to observe it, of our human experience, if you're willing to observe it for a second, you can see that almost as a endemic issue within our society, of the world as a whole, is the fact that we're taught roles from a young age. We adopt those roles as truths, even if they hurt us beyond belief. And it takes an enormous amount of strength and an enormous amount of determination not to suffer anymore, for us to let go of them. And believe it or not, I find most people are addicted to the suffering. They like it. It's almost a crazy thing. Once you've made the determination in your life that you don't want to suffer, that you want to live a simple life because it's just not worth worrying about how you're going to pay your bills every single Friday and feed your family, and you start living, even die early, you start living simply, where you get more into the vegetables and the fruits, and you're living more simply. Some people just don't want to do that. They seem to be so addicted to being sick, to being in bad relationships. It's almost like if they're happy, they're unhappy because they're happy. And it's a really strange dynamic, and you start to see it the more you let go of it yourself, and you say, no, I don't want that drama in my life. And you never reject. That's the one thing I wanted to mention in our relationships. You don't reject something. You embrace something else. And pretty soon there's no room for you. If you're really hugging someone that you love tightly, you don't have an arm left to push something else away. And it's like that in our everyday life. Instead of rejecting something, we want to embrace it. So if I've chosen that I want to embrace happiness and joy in my life, and I want to be compassionate, loving as much as I can, and I want to be as healthy as my body will allow me to be, and I want to enjoy this experience to its utmost. Once you start to do that, you fundamentally change, even though you don't see it, and other people begin to change. How you see them starts to change, I guess. You start to see the mechanisms of their suffering, and you just want to embrace them and say, stop that. It's hurting me to watch you hurt so badly. But you start to see that human condition just keep coming out, and you can't really blame the person who's having it because they were taught that behavior, and they're not there yet where they can say, this is not what I want in my life, and this is how I'm willing to go somewhere else. You know, I don't want to lay in this briar patch, so let me go find a field of grass. They became addicted to that briar patch. You know, they want to hold it and get all cut up and marred. It's kind of a crazy dynamic to watch, but and I think the more you release it, the more you start living simply. I would never go back to that complicated life that I once had. I just could not imagine. I sometimes think that was a different lifetime for me, because I cannot imagine going back to the big house where I had to make a high six-figure income, and pay for it all, and worry about my bills, and that we have the nicest cars, and I can't imagine going back to that life. It seems so foreign to me, but yet I'm friends with quite a few people who aren't sleeping, their relationships suffering, because they're shut down to the possibility that their lives can be any different. And it's kind of a sad thing to watch.
It is, and I'm like you, got rid of the house, and anything that really was tying me down, and I breathe so much easier now. My life is much, much simpler, and it's like I see people they're still buying this, and my nephews just want the latest technology, and they have to have this, and they have to have that. And it's like, that's going to bite you in the ass someday. But if that's what you want to do, go have fun. Yeah. Enjoy it. But it's just interesting how, at least with my family, when I first came out and said that I was doing psychic readings, everybody the different reaction between even the microcosm of a family. Mm-hmm. The ones that were very old school were very like, that's taboo, how dare you do that? And then the ones who were really closer to me said, you go for it. But, you know, it's the fluctuation. We always, in my family, even if we had a fight about something, we always laughed pretty much after it because it was so silly. Mm-hmm. But as we got older, it's like I have one sister now that basically won't talk to me. And it's just like, I accept her, I love her, she is who she is, and she's got a lot of stress on her plate. And it's interesting how she really had a hard time with me simplifying. And it's just like, it was very interesting, the dynamics of me living my dream and living my life to the fullest, the way I see it, was just hitting her the wrong way.
Right.
And she couldn't handle it. So it's very interesting.
It's almost like, and I see this all the time. We'll use drugs as an example, but let's stick with one like nicotine, for example. If there's a relationship of two people and they're smokers, when one decides they want to quit, the other one tries to do everything in their power to sabotage that experience. It's almost like, I'm not strong enough to do it, so I don't want you to do it either. And I'm going to fight you on it. I know it's unhealthy for me. I know this isn't good for me. And I know that there's other ways. But because I don't feel that I can. And I don't feel that I'm empowered enough to make a change in my life. I want to sabotage yours to prove my ego right, that I'm not strong enough to do these things. It's almost like we need, verification. And that's the jealousy of ego and stuff like that. And that's part of the societal shift too, is that there are some people now that are like kind of live and let live. And just because you don't find that in your families are kind of a strange thing, I think. Don't you? We're born into them, and because we've been given this birthright of a last name, maybe, we feel that we have to be accepted by every single person in that family, or that we need to accept them too, without realizing that they were born with the same kind of baggage and thoughts that I was, maybe even if we're opposed. And
right.
And we put so much pressure on each other to conform instead of celebrating the difference.
With my family, when I was just opening up to my spiritual awakening journey or whatever, the one thing I listened to and read a lot of Denise Lynn, and she said, look at your family, then go back 2 generations and see how much your family has grown or how much it's kept the same repetitive patterns going. So it's very interesting to really see the physical, how much we're like our heritage, but also how much we do mirror each other and our forefathers in so many ways, that we're bringing that kind of genetics forward. And it's like there's times, well, if you do a major healing, they say it goes back 7 generations backwards and 7 generations forward if you break a serious pattern that needs to be, like something like abuse or like an addiction like drugs or alcohol. If you break it, it can affect 7 generations forward and backwards.
Wow.
In the healing power. So it's I think a lot of people now, at least the people, of course, like minds attract, but are really stopping and saying, I don't need this abuse. I don't need the addiction. Though in some ways, I think we always have some kind of addiction. Some are more healthy addictions, but there's an addiction in some ways, that there's something that keeps us going.
And that's so true. And we get into the judgment side of the relationships too, because you're right. I mean, there's not one of us that wasn't born a human. And because of that, we're born with certain things. We're born with the propensity to be addicted to things. We're born with certain psychological conditions. We're born with parents that are going to teach us right or wrong or indifferent. We're born into a condition. And that's part of the deal of becoming a human, is that we're going to have these things. It's judging them all as bad is the problem. And I think that if we were more accepting of the fact that I'm an individual and I'm going to have my quirks, and guess what? There's going to be people out there that don't like me and don't like what I have to say, don't care, don't whatever. But I accept them. They're more than free to feel the way they want to. And I don't necessarily say I don't want to be around you. I'm just going to continue to be who I want to be. But imagine if we were so accepting of the fact that we're humans first, and a lot less willing to condemn ourselves for it. I think that we struggle so much with the judgments that they create, they exacerbate our.
How are you this morning, Jennifer?
I'm good. I'm really enjoying this conversation. Tom has always had a lot of great insights, and highly recommend people go check out.
He lost his internet connection. He's probably rebooting.
Okay. His writing is, we both are on Rebel Society, and I did post the site, his writing on the chat room, and it's, and when I get the YouTube thing done, I'll post it there as well. He is really, it's very fluid writing, and it really is from the heart. So it really is amazing writing. You don't generally get this kind of writing from a man, especially 250-pound 6'2" man. You generally do not get. It's a very sensual kind of writing. And it's really beautiful. It's beautiful. And I think a lot of the men are finding that they need to connect more to that feminine side, and yet they're all afraid of what will this, what will people think?
What will this do to my ego, oppression of myself?
Exactly. And what will other people think? And it's, once you get to that point on your spiritual journey, you say, what the hell, I don't care. This is me. Either they're going to accept me or not. If they don't, they're lost.
I agree with you.
It's very interesting. I mean, lately I've had...
Yes, folks, this is one of those days when little things are going to go awry all day.
It's a beautiful day.
Yes, it is.
And there is a lot of sun flares. There's a lot of planetary action these days, and definitely weather-wise, it's definitely interesting how they're showing that HAARP was active, and now there's all these tornadoes. So it's kind of interesting how things are really opening up our eyes to really see the possibilities of what we are as human beings are creating, and humanity, and the people who are afraid of losing their greed and their place. I also posted a movie that I posted it in the chat room, and it's Matthew Modine did this short film called Jesus is a Commie, and it is very thought-provoking film to make you really to really make you realize that if we just accept everybody as they are, don't put any pressure on anybody to conform, we all would just get along so beautifully. And it's interesting that because what he is saying that by definition, Jesus basically was sharing everything he had, owned nothing, just was what's mine is yours. We're brothers. We can share. We're in this together. And by definition, that's what communism is. But that the leaders of communism really, as many people have seen in today's society, have put in the greed into it. And that's what destroyed all the countries is they overrun. They went overboard with the premise of sharing everything and said, by human nature, we all want to have our share. We want to have what's mine. And shifting it a little bit to say that we're all in this together when we all live through our heart and understanding that one is no better than the other. Things could go so much smoother. That we're not out to take anything from one another, that we're here just sharing and giving. And if we all find that balance, it would truly change humanity's path in so many ways. I mean, even with animals, if we understand that they need shelter and food, they need their space, we need our space.
It's interesting because when you look at how convoluted... Hello, Thomas. Welcome back.
Yes, back.
When you take a look at the laws and how what they call laws are actually rules and regulations, that the maroons who run the government, the corporate government, because we truly cannot own anything except what? Our God-given rights.
Our human body, and that's about it. If you think about it, rights are...
but stop and think about that, because now there's corporations say, well, they can patent human genes. Every
That's true.
disease has a patent. Every disease. Every
like I really
pharmaceutical medicine has a
disease.
patent. It's like I'm having getting ready to turn Nye County, Nevada on their ears. Because I was given a ticket for $1,274 because someone opened the gate and let my dogs out. Then I had a deputy sheriff violate the no trespassing sign twice on my property that I rent from a bank.
Mm-hmm.
So I went up and tried to draw down from the internet job descriptions. You can't, which means they're hiding them.
Yeah.
So because this little deputy sheriff, she says, well, I need to see your ID. I said, no, you don't. You're on my property and my... Well, no, I said, yes, they do. I said, you better get your shit together, lady. Anyways, I'm going to let young Thomas here and you continue your conversation.
Sir Dave. Thomas, you there?
I'm here. For now.
For now. Yeah, really. So, we were talking about how society influencing us and actually in some ways has control, and your cable went off, so someone didn't like what you were saying, maybe. No, I'm only kidding.
I looked at the parking lot, and there's 2 Comcast trucks out there, and I'm like, are they watching me? I'm just kidding.
Yep. They're always watching me. It's very interesting that on 60 Minutes they actually did a piece on how when you tag somebody in a conversation on Facebook, they're actually using it now so they can get facial recognition from your picture, so they can use it for marketing and also to keep an eye on what you're doing and where you're going. So it's very interesting how, Big Brother really is here, and you do have to be very careful what you say on social marketing and media, because they're out there, and it's very fascinating to me how they all say there's privacy laws that literally go out the window in a way when you're on social marketing and media and stuff. So there's that mixed bag of, the internet is great for information. I mean, the flash of information about something that's happened, I generally find it on Facebook before I find it anywhere else. So I think that's fascinating, that the news is out there, and it's really helped revolutions around the world. I mean, if I had someone on who was in Egypt during their revolution, and on the day that they actually won, he said social media was a huge bonus, even though they were cut off from it. Just because they were cut off, it helped the cause.
Yeah, I think people as a whole don't like to be controlled. And, there's some societies that are more used to it than others, some cultures that are more, that are much older than ours. The thing about the American society is that we were founded on running from that type of persecution. And I think that's probably the reason why we grew so quickly, is because we didn't have it at one point. And now we're starting to become like those that we once thought were persecuting us. Now, social media, everything that is created by a human being is a sword that cuts two ways. I think Einstein said as much when it came down to atomic energy, that, one of his greatest fears, I can't remember the quote verbatim, but one of the greatest fears was the destructive power that he had unleashed. But in the same token, it's provided relatively clean energy. It's kind of debatable, but relatively clean and otherwise inexpensive energy to the planet. And it does hold great promise for a future where maybe a mature set of humans can make some good out of it. It's no different than stuff like social media. It's a sword that cuts both ways. It can be tremendously helpful in revolutionary movements, but can also be detrimental to the individual as far as their privacy goes. And we sign on to that, though, when we decide to use this type of medium. We know full well what we believe it's capable of, and we probably don't know the half of it. But if we're going to use things like this, we've got to be very cognizant of the fact that we're giving something up to use it. And if we're going to become addicted to it, we're going to also have to understand that we're giving up quite a bit to use it, and that addiction can be just as harmful as any other. And it's about the empowerment thing I had been talking about earlier, that we have this power within us. And once we stop blaming other people for what we perceive as misfortunes, and when we stop laying the blame at the feet of God, and we stop picking on Satan as this evil doer, and we stop looking outside of ourselves for all these things that create havoc and good in the world, and realize that it's all within us, and that we can start to determine our own destiny. And some people, when you talk to them in that regard, they consider you maybe an anarchist because you're kind of bucking their system. And whenever you seem to be bucking the system, you're labeled in a way that makes you an outcast. And so you got to be really careful in how you approach it. And I will talk about it when I'm asked, or if the discussion prompts me to. But I'm much less likely to give my political opinions on things now than I once was. I was a very political animal, and even though I still am, I'm much less likely to just espouse my view in public. Because at some point you can almost feel like the proverbial Christ on the cross. I mean, here's a man that in our story, he's done nothing wrong, and yet he's being beaten, tortured, and executed for doing really nothing wrong according to the story. We all can feel that at different stages of our lives if we just decide we're going to say something different than the crowd wants us to say. And we can certainly learn the value of not throwing a stone if we haven't sinned. And there's all kinds of those analogies in that spiritual text, in that Bible, whatever you want to call it, that we can use as a part of our condition. But imagine that. I was sitting at a red light, dropped my kids off at school this morning, and it's kind of early, and I'm sitting at a red light, and everywhere I looked, there was a camera pointed at my car. And I felt really unnerved by it. I don't know who's looking at me, and I don't know why they're looking at me, and I have no idea what they're doing with what they're getting. It was kind of unnerving, though, don't you think? Just to be sitting at a red light with cameras pointed at you from every direction. It was weird. It felt honestly unliberating. It felt the opposite of being liberated.
Well, it was interesting. I had mentioned, I'm not sure. Well, yes, you did hear it. About the 60 Minutes is the fact that in some ways they were saying that it's trying to help us be more than we are. But in other ways, it's really holding us in. And the other ways that so many shows now, the media says, they have all these wonderful things already working and everything, and yet they say, publicly, no, we don't have this technology. And I say, bull, that you've had this and much more. It's just you're only leaking out a little bit at a time. I just know far too much with my dad being in Black Ops and the stuff that he's worked on, even though he never said anything, the hints of what is going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's just wonderful that, they're trying to blindside us in a way and control us by controlling the information. And so many people now are just saying, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not buying it.
It's a scary thing, too. One thing that came out now, I'm going to hesitate to bring this into the discussion, but I had a ton of issues with what went on in Boston and what went on in Los Angeles with the Dormer guy. And it doesn't make me very popular in the circles I run in, but I can't help myself. But one thing that came out of the Boston thing is that I'm assuming it was the FBI, it was some governmental agency. They were using facial recognition software, and it might have been what 60 Minutes was alluding to in what you've discussed. And the problem was that the software failed. It didn't properly identify any of the suspects, even though the FBI had a record of one of them. So it's not so much the failure of the technology that unnerves me as much as what that powerful failure can mean to someone else. I go back to Richard Jewell and the Atlanta bombing, and I'm in that industry, so that's why I'm intimately aware of some of these events. But you look at Richard Jewell in the Atlanta bombing, where he was named the suspect, and it turned out he had nothing to do with it, that it was this other guy, Eric Rudolph, who also had bombed some abortion clinics in his day as a right-wing fundamentalist. And you can see the power of misidentifying somebody. Mm-hmm. And what happens if that facial recognition software came back with the hit that was wrong? And by relying so much on technology and by being such a slave to it, again, that sword cuts both ways. It can be tremendously enlightening. We're having this great conversation right now because of technology. And you and I have discussed things on Facebook, for example, and there's Twitter, and there's all these things that we can use for good. But there's also this humongous negative impact. It could be true. And gosh, if any government is proven, it will find the negative and a positive wherever it wants. And that's a kind of a scary thing to a guy like me who just wants to be able to walk the streets freely without worrying about Big Brother watching, and again, I was sitting at that light feeling unnerved. Gosh, man, if I said the wrong thing to somebody and I have no clue that it was the wrong thing, I've got 50 sets of eyes on me right now, potentially.
Right.
It's just so unnerving. And I don't know about you, but I'm also afraid that sometimes there's a big amount of fear in saying your opinion about something. Because it seems like we're on the precipice in this nation of going in one of two directions. One is we retreat from all this patriotic fervor that seemed to have been driving us into warfare. or we go so far overboard in this need for security that we no longer represent the country as this was founded. And guess what? We're not old enough to have failed yet. You know, we're not 300 years old yet, and the experiment seems to be failing, that you cannot be free and liberated and enjoy all those rights endowed to you by your creator in this country, that is impossible, because when you are, you're not only threatened, but you're a threat. And that is sad to me. It is sad that if you say something like that you might be labeled a target by those who want to investigate you. It's almost like the witch hunts of, what Hitler used to execute. Stalin's done the same thing. McCarthy tried it in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Nixon did it to some, to some fortunate failure. It just seems like, gosh, the more we lose our individual control for this idea of security, we're playing right into the hands of those that have always sought a way to control us. It's so contrary to what we were founded on, and it's so contrary to how I want to live my life. I don't want a gun in my house. I don't want to have to lock my door, and if somebody kills me for it, that's the price I pay for freedom. That's how I look at it. It's
right.
But do you get that feeling? And I was listening to the conversation before, when I came back on, that when you speak that truth, that's what, you speak that truth and you say what you see plainly, that at this point in time in our nation, you put yourself at some kind of risk.
Definitely. I mean, there are whistleblowers that had gotten heavy fines for speaking the truth of what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's becoming more and more prevalent. The government is actually going after the very people who are saying this is what they're doing and is highly illegal. And because they're saying and taking a stand that certain things are illegal and saying, I'm telling you this because I am a citizen and I want something done. The people who did the illegal action get a slap on the hand, and then the people who are doing go to jail.
Yeah.
For actually telling the truth of what's going on.
It's so backwards to logic. Isn't it?
And it's like, okay, where did the shift happen that this country has shifted in such a negative way? And there's so many ways that I know this has been in the plan for like the 1950s. I understand that. I understand that this has been going on for a very long time. But my question is, why did it take the rest of society, the citizens of this country, to wake up? And why aren't we really waking up and taking a stand against what is suppression?
I've got a theory on this, and let me run it by you and tell me what you think. We're slowly being fattened up. Well, not slowly. I mean, obesity in this country has exploded in the last 20 years. We're becoming a sickly nation, an addicted nation. And as long as it seems that we can afford our trivial toys, the big TV, the iPad, the iPhone, whatever distractions, I'm just as guilty as everyone else. I'm not speaking from some higher ground here, but that as long as we have those toys to play with and food that kind of satiates our mind a little bit, and sex every once in a while, and gosh, you got it all over the TV, so you should be more than satisfied there, I guess. Even though it seems like we're becoming less satisfied with our sexual lives, and the more pornography is prevalent, it seems we're becoming less dissatisfied with it. But it seems like somebody along the line, some master psychologist that worked for Big Brother at some level, determined that as long as human beings get these basic needs taken care of, you can basically do whatever you want, because they're not energized to revolt against this. Would they much rather sit there and play their PlayStations, or would they really want to go out to a rally again, to free Bradley Manning, for example? Do they love their freedom and their liberty so much that what's going on in Guantanamo Bay would be abhorrent to them. Even though these people are, some of them, 40% of them maybe, are our enemies, and were captured on the field of battle, it still should abhor us when we violate civil liberties and when we violate human rights. That should be so contrary to who we are that it sickens us. But I think as long as we've got Twitter and we've got this technology to play with, and we get our sex every once in a while, and we can eat fattening food that makes our minds feel good for a little bit, and we can get high every once in a while, we don't care about those values that once defined our country. And I really start to wonder whether or not those values ever really did define our country, or if they were kind of creations, ideas that people threw out there as what should define our country that were really not attainable by humans in our current state of being. We're just not mature enough to raise ourselves to that level of society. And we see that in our relationships as well, right? I mean,
right.
Relationships are failing at a record rate, and marriages are crumbling all around us. I've talked to people who have shocked me when they tell me their marriage is ending. When my marriage ended, it shocked everyone we knew. I mean, we had friends that actually cried saying, if your marriage can't make it, none of us can. And here, our marriage wasn't all that great, and behind closed doors. So you look at it and you're going, gosh, I mean, is our society like a microcosm of our relationships, or is it the other way around? Or are we just kind of, I'll use the word doomed for lack of a better word, are we doomed to have this experience because we need to learn that it's not the one we want to have, and it might take time. That's what evolution is. This is where we need to get. That's what evolution does. We need, you got a short-necked giraffe, and he needs the leaves at the top, tallest trees. Nature recognizes that, and soon he's got a long neck that he can reach those leaves. And, that's what evolution is. Evolution is a progress towards what we need. And in a society, there's no difference there, except right now we're being so dumbfounded by drugs, food, and entertainment that we don't know what we need. We think those are the things that we need, and we don't care if CNN put out a poll that said 40% of us are willing to give up some civil liberties to fight terrorism. I kind of like dropped my phone that I was reading it on. And then I remember that, okay, 60% of us are still against that. That's a good thing. But 40% of us means out of 10 of us in this complex right here, 4 of us are willing to be less free to fight this thing we call terrorism. It's absolutely amazing to me that somebody could have that thought, that they're so afraid of something that they're willing to be less free to have some illusion of security. And it scares me for where we're going. It scares me for where we're going because our kids are now being raised with this heightened sense of security and this heightened need of being protected and an enormous amount of fear. And unless we as parents sit them down and say this happens everywhere, but one thing that makes us great is that we are free to walk wherever we want without papers. And God, we're just so liberated here. We don't want to give that up because somebody doesn't like us and wants to plant a bomb on a street somewhere. We can't give up, or else we've lost. This society, this whole experiment, this American experiment is a failure. It's an absolute failure.
And I'm going to ask you, I know you only wanted to do this an hour, but I sure would like to continue this conversation if you can hold on for a few more minutes. Are you available? Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break right now. And I just wanted to tell everybody this has been a fascinating conversation, and we are going to continue it. We are donation-based here at with Spirit Radio. So if you can give us a few dollars so we can continue this conversation for a very, very long time to awaken us all, so we all have that common place to say, we know better, and here we are. Please, we are greatly appreciative of anything that you can do. We're going to take a few moments, let Dave do what he needs to do, and we'll be back with Tom in just a few minutes. This is Air, and I am Jennifer Hillman.